I remember just a few minutes before the budget, almost about 45 minutes before the budget, there was a TV panel where we were talking about what are the tax expectations from the budget. And there were two type of expectations which we were all looking at. One was on the tax side, where we wanted the government to make minimal changes, and the other one was on the capex side, where we wanted the government to ensure that there is a huge focus on capex cycle because that would generate employment, etc. And it is almost that the finance minister was hearing that particular conversation, because less than an hour later, what we saw her delivering on the floor of the parliament was almost everything that we were all aspiring for. First, the good news. There's always doomsday sayers prior to the budget where people talk about introduction of wealth tax, inheritance tax, etc. Not that I believed any of that. And I'm really glad that the finance minister has avoided doing anything to raise any new taxes. Quite understandable. We have a robust collection of taxes, almost 24% more than what is budgeted, one of the largest ever. The GST collections are upwards of 1,41,000 crores in the last month, which again is amazing, just shows pent-up demand, people spending, money is going into the segments which government wants to, etc. So the finance minister has not raised any taxes. There are a number of changes which have come on the direct tax side. Several of them, in fact, many of them are quite positive, and I was surprised that the finance minister has not covered them in her speech. But let's talk of some of the key things which I see going forward. First is, thanks to the impetus of expenditure on the capex, I am seeing quite a bit of revival of the economy, and the budgeted projection which would kickstart the economy, which would get us that 8.5% plus growth next year, very much is supported by the capex spending in the budget. If you look at the provisions of the direct taxes, one of the most important provisions, I would say, is an introduction of a settlement scheme within the Act. Very, very interesting. What is now provided is that if you have filed a tax return, you are of course allowed to revise that return if you find any errors and omissions, but you are now permitted to update your return within a period of 12 or 24 months from the date of filing of the return. So for example, if when you have filed your tax return, assessment proceedings are on, and you believe that certain income should have been offered by you to tax, rather than get into litigation, rather than get into a prolonged concern about penalties, etc., you can update your return. And if you update your return, you pay the tax on the additional income which you have returned, you pay interest, and you pay an additional tax of 25% if the revision happens within 12 months, and 50% if the revision happens within 24 months. And that's very, very welcome. It's almost an immunity scheme built in the Income Tax Act, something which taxpayers have been asking for a long, long time. And then we have the digital tax, tax on any digital currency, not necessarily only cryptocurrency, NFTs, etc., which will be taxed as a separate block at the rate of 30% with no set-off of losses. Just like, for example, speculation income or income from horse racing or whatever else. So sort of crypto, non-fungible tokens, all digital assets have been grouped, and any income arising from transfer tax gets taxed at 30%. Again, important to have that clarity, important to know that going forward, you would not have litigation. A few other interesting points. One is any reimbursement of expenditure or compensation received on account of COVID is outside the ambit of taxation, is not covered by Section 56 and would not be liable to tax. Couple of other changes. One very interesting change is in the Section 37 of the Income Tax Act, which allows deduction for all expenditure which has been incurred for the purpose of business. That section does not permit deduction of expenditure if that expenditure is in violation of public policy. And there were enough and more case laws to say that that public policy is the Indian public policy and not the foreign public policy. Now it is provided that if a payment is made for contravention of an overseas law or a public policy, even that would not be tax deductible. Could potentially impact pharma companies and other companies which do settlement overseas for IP infringement, etc. Yet another amendment which I thought was not possibly warranted is that companies which have overseas subsidiaries or investment in an overseas company, if you receive dividends, those dividends are taxable only at the rate of 15%. That section has been taken away and they are now taxable fully. Obviously, one would get credit for foreign taxes, but I don't know whether this is something intended. There was no discussion by the finance minister. And probably I'm sure there'll be representation. This could impact IT companies who have got major income coming from overseas where they have set up subsidiaries. Many of them, of course, operate as branches. But all in all, I'm delighted that there are no new taxes. I'm also delighted that the provision for new industrial companies, which was to expire in 23, has been extended by a year to 24. That was an industry demand, and again shows that the government is hearing and willing to make changes on the basis of what you hear. Again, welcome increase of 1 year on angel taxation. Overall, I would be very, very positive about the provisions of the finance bill and generally of the budget, and I am very, very sure that it will spur a major growth. Thank you.